Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here and also a proud member. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Benjamin S. Carson, Sr., candidate for the Republican nomination for President of the United States. I will keep this brief, as Dr. Carson is well known to many in Cleveland, especially in the worlds of politics, healthcare, and philanthropy. He grew up in Detroit, raised by a single mother. He overcame the troubles and challenges of his youth in the inner city to become a world-renowned neurosurgeon. I could almost end it there. After graduating from Yale University and a certain medical school up north, Dr. Carson completed his residency in neurological surgery at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. After a brief stint abroad, he returned to Johns Hopkins, becoming, at age 33, the youngest major division director in the hospital's history. 3 years later, in 1987, he was the first surgeon to successfully separate conjoined twins joined at the back of the head. Over the years, Dr. Carson has been honored by the NAACP, CNN, Time Magazine, the Library of Congress, and many others. Indeed, in 2008, Dr. Carson was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President George W. Bush. It was in 2013, though, that he came to the attention of political watchers who would eventually draft him to run for the candidacy. At the National Prayer Breakfast, he delivered a speech devoting part of it to solutions to the problems that vex our healthcare system, solutions that many saw as being opposed to President Obama's signature Affordable Care Act. Following that, he became an increasingly popular figure in the media for his views on a range of social and political issues. He's a frequent visitor to Cleveland. The Carson Scholars Fund supports 2 Ben Carson reading rooms in Cleveland elementary schools. In fact, Ohio's first was in Cleveland's central neighborhood. Dr. Carson announced his candidacy for the Republican nomination in Detroit on May 4th. He calls for a balanced budget amendment, education and health care reform, and protection of the Second Amendment. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming, in true Cleveland fashion, Dr. Ben Carson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Candy and I are delighted to be here with you. Ohio is a special place, having grown up in Detroit, only 50 miles away from Toledo. And an interesting thing happened in Ohio some years ago. Candy and I were on our way from Ann Arbor to New Haven. We weren't going together at that time, but we were in the same car. And we had to get back to New Haven by that morning to turn the rental car in. And by the time we reached Youngstown, Ohio, we had both fallen asleep. I was driving. At about 90 miles an hour. And awakened by the vibration of the car as it was going off the road heading toward a ravine. And I just grabbed the wheel and turned it, and the car just started spinning like a spinning top. You know, they tell you that your life flashes before your eyes just before you die. It's true. I saw like this film reel. I said, wow, I'm going to die. And the car stopped in the correct lane next to the gravel, just in time to pull off as an 18-wheeler came barreling through. And by that time, Candy was awake, too. And she said, what happened? I said, nothing. Go back to sleep. But, of course, she knew something had happened. And we started discussing what, in fact, had happened. And that God had spared our lives. And we said, he obviously spared our lives for a reason. And that was the day we actually started going together. And earlier this month, we celebrated our 40th anniversary. So that was good. But, a lot of people have asked me, why would you trade a wonderful reputation in medicine for a career in politics? And I ask myself that, too. But the answer is, it's not about me. It's not about my career. It's about America and what is happening to America. And, my whole professional career was involved with giving children a chance at life and quality of life. And as I look at the landscape right now, I recognize that their future is in jeopardy, particularly their economic future. And I'm going to say more about that. But, you know, I came from a pretty unlikely place. You know, my parents got divorced when I was very young. My mother was one of 24 children. Got married at age 13 after being shuffled from home to home, cobbling together no better than a third-grade education and wanting to escape rural Tennessee. And that's how they moved to Detroit. But some years later, she discovered my father was a bigamist. And that, of course, occasioned the divorce. And she was trying to raise 2 young sons by herself. We moved to Boston, where she had at least the support of an older sister and brother-in-law, even though they lived in a tenement. And it was a horrible environment. Everything that you can imagine about a tenement was there. Rats, roaches, winos, sirens, gangs, murders. Both of my older cousins, who we adored, were killed. It was just the kind of environment that it was. Never any money for anything. And my mother worked extraordinarily hard. 2, 3 jobs at a time as a domestic, because she didn't want to be on welfare. She struggled to stay off of welfare, even though all of her friends were saying, you got 2 boys, you can be on welfare, you can get all this aid. But, you know, she struggled to stay off, occasionally accepted some food stamps, but for the most part was successful. But there was never money for anything. And she was very thrifty. I mean, my mother would save every penny, every dime, hide it away, drive a car until it would no longer make a sound, and then she would go out and buy a brand new car. And people would say, how does that woman afford a new car? Well, she didn't believe in buying used cars because she says that's somebody else's problem. Why would I want to buy that? You know, she was actually a very wise woman. I do believe if my mother was Secretary of Treasury, we would not be in a deficit situation. But she was very concerned about our academic performance. I was a horrible student. My brother was not much better. And since she had never really been able to have much education herself, she had an intense desire that we get it. And she prayed to God to give her wisdom to know what to do to get her young sons to understand the importance of intellectual development so that they could control their own lives and didn't have to just work menial jobs like she did. And you know what? God gave her the wisdom, at least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was all that wise because it was to turn off the TV. Let us watch only 2 or 3 TV programs during the week. And with all that spare time, read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that, you know, and she put little check marks and highlights, underlines, and we thought she was reading them, but she wasn't. But I was disgusted because I wanted to be out playing like everybody else. And there I was stuck reading those books. But as I started reading the books, I started reading about people of accomplishment, amazing accomplishment in all kinds of different fields. And I began to recognize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. And I stopped listening to all the people around who were always talking about how you couldn't do stuff and how this was against you and that was against you and no one's ever done this. And I just heard that so much, I stopped. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to laugh and call me dummy. They were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, you know, I just had a very different frame of mind, and it really altered the trajectory of my life. It's one of the reasons that Candy and I started the Carson Scholars Fund. You know, we would go in schools and we would see all of these trophies. All-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state this, that, the other. The quarterback was the big man on campus. But what about the academic superstar? What did they get? National Honor Society pen? Pat on the head? They're their little nerd. You know, nobody ever cared anything about them. And we were very alarmed, particularly being aware of the statistics of how we were doing vis-a-vis other industrialized nations, particularly in STEM areas. So we actually had the idea to start our own Scholar Award program. People were saying, there's a gazillion different scholarship programs. Why are you wasting your time? But it seemed like a very important thing to do. And we started giving out Scholar Awards to kids starting in the 4th grade for superior academic performance and demonstration of humanitarian qualities. You had to have both. You couldn't just be smart. You had to care about other people, because we try to cultivate the leaders for the next generation. And we don't need people who are just smart and don't care about anybody else. We got plenty of those already. And so we started in Maryland with 25 scholarships, one for each county in Maryland. That was in 1996 we gave those out. And as of today, we've given out more than 7,000 in all 50 states. And the other part of the program are the reading rooms. They're places that no little kid could possibly pass up. And we particularly target Title I schools. The Scholar Program is for all schools everywhere, every background. But the reading program also we can put in all kinds of different places, and some of them are in very nice places. But we particularly target Title I schools, where a lot of the kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library or a poorly funded library. They're not going to become readers and lovers of reading. And as you know, 70 to 80% of high school dropouts are functionally illiterate. So they get points for the number of books they read, and they can trade them in for prizes. And in the beginning, they're interested in the prizes, but it doesn't take long before they really become much better students, and it really does change the trajectory of their lives. And that program, as you probably know, 9 out of 10 nonprofits fail, has not only succeeded, it's won the Simon Award, which is only given to one philanthropic organization in the nation each year. Comes with a check for $250,000, by the way. And also the Ronald McDonald House Charity Award, only one in the nation, also a 6-figure check, and other awards. But we don't do it for the awards. We do it for the effect, because what we're trying to do is affect the future of our country. And that is really the best answer for the question, why would I get involved in the political arena? Because I am very concerned about the direction of the country in which we live. I'm a history buff. I recognize that this is a country that was designed around the people. It was different than all the other countries of the world in that respect, of, for, and by the people. The government was to be there specifically to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What happened to us? Come all the way to 2009, and you got the Affordable Care Act, where the government says, I don't care what you people think. This is what we're doing. And if you don't like it, too bad. That's a marked change from the founding principles of our nation. And my feeling was that if we accept that, what else won't we accept? And it's not that I don't want people to have good health care. I do, as a physician, want people to have excellent health care. And I've proposed a way that it can happen using health savings accounts. Now, health savings accounts are mentioned in the so-called Affordable Care Act, but only a small section and primarily to limit them. But in fact, if you make them available, and I'm talking about the kind of health savings account that a person has control over, not the kind where there's 6 bureaucrats involved. And you make it available from the time you're born until the time you die. You can pass it to your family when you die. You also can pay for it with the same dollars that we pay for traditional health care with, except you wouldn't have to use as many. And you give people the ability to shift money within their HSA. So mom is $500 short for a special mammogram. Her husband can give it to her out of hers, or her son, or her uncle, or cousin, or anybody in the family. It makes every family essentially their own insurance company and gives you enormous flexibility to cover things. And also it makes you care about each other. If Uncle Joe is smoking like a chimney, everybody's going to say, Joe, put that cigarette down. The kids are going to be hiding his cigarettes, all kinds of things. You know, it's good. Get people involved with each other. But also the cost of your catastrophic insurance drops dramatically because very little is coming out of it. It's sort of like a homeowner's insurance policy with a large deductible. It's a very different animal than a homeowner's policy where you want everything covered. And then you allow it to be bought across state lines. Introduce that element, and you really drive costs down enormously. More importantly, you now put the care in the hands of the patient and the healthcare provider without a middleman. You don't need the middleman in there. You know, what do you need for good healthcare? A patient and a healthcare provider. Along came the middleman to facilitate the relationship, and now it has become the primary entity with the patient and the healthcare provider at its beck and call. This is absolutely absurd and absolutely unnecessary. Now, the system that I just described, it works well for the majority of people, but what about the indigent? Not so well for the indigent. How do we take care of the indigent now? Medicaid. What's the annual Medicaid budget? $400 to $500 billion a year. How many people participate? About a quarter of our population, about 80 million people. 80 million into 400 billion goes 5,000 times. That's how much we allocate for every man, woman, and child on Medicaid, $5,000. What could you buy with that? Concierge practice, boutique practice, $2,000 to $3,000 a year on average. So we can put them all in a boutique practice and still have thousands left over to buy their catastrophic insurance, which is much cheaper now. Now, I'm not advocating we do that. I'm saying that's how much money we actually have put aside. What if we use that money efficiently? And, you know, we can certainly do it in a way that we can provide health savings accounts for them. Now, the people in Washington, if they're true to form, will say, no, they're too stupid. They don't know. They couldn't possibly manage a health savings account, because I don't know why they think everybody's stupid. Maybe they look in the mirror. But anyway, you know, the thing is, they said the same thing about food stamps. They said you can't actually give them food stamps because they're too stupid. And they'll go out and buy porterhouse steak the first 5 days, and the 6th day they'll be on the corner begging for food. Did that happen? No. They learn how to buy rice and beans and corn and hamburger helper. And guess what? They would also quickly learn how to manage that health savings account. You know, Mr. Jones, who has that diabetic foot ulcer, will learn very quickly not to go to the emergency room, where it costs 5 times more to get it taken care of than it is in the clinic. And the difference is, in the emergency room, they fix you, kick you out. In the clinic, they fix it and say, now, Mr. Jones, let's get your diabetes under control. A whole nother level of savings, which we are not realizing. That's what we have got to do. And also, Mr. Jones is learning about responsibility for his own health. Anything that we advocate should lead people toward a sense of personal responsibility and not toward a sense of dependency. And I think that will help us enormously as a nation. Now, you know, a lot of people have said to me, but why would you run for public office? You don't have any experience. Why is it that people think that the only people with experience are politicians? and that they're the only ones who are indispensable and can solve our problems. If you look at the collective experience of everybody in Congress, it adds up to about 9,000 years. Has it really helped us that much? It doesn't seem to me that that's helping. And what I would prefer is someone with experience solving complex problems, someone with experience putting together teams of people with lots of different types of expertise to focus on a problem and get that problem solved, even if it has never been done before in history. And one of the things that I know as a surgeon is that nobody wants to have surgery, and nobody likes the discomfort and the short-term pain, but they like the long-term effect because it may solve your problem, it may solve your life. And that's what we have to begin to look at as we think about how we're going to solve the many problems. And I would like to have somebody has experience innovating and coming up with new things and new ways to do things. I've had that experience multiple times in my life, and it helps. And also a lot of corporate experience. There are few people running who spend as much time in the corporate America as I have. 18 years on the board of Kellogg, 16 on Costco, figuring out how to make things work efficiently, learning about things like the Lean Six Sigma program, which was used by Toyota and 3M and Apple Computers to turn their operations around from inefficiency to efficiency, in most cases saving at least 25%. Those are the kinds of things that could work extremely effectively in our government. There is absolutely no reason that the people of America don't deserve an efficiently functioning government. I don't think most people have any problem paying into the government as long as they see that the money is being used in an efficient and an effective way. And then, what about experience in life? I think that's a very useful thing. You know, I've been fortunate enough, some people wouldn't think it was fortunate, to have experienced every economic level in our country, from the lowest to the highest, and to work all kinds of jobs, you name it, pretty much. I've had a chance to do it. And to see how people feel and how people think in those various arenas. Because one of the things that has happened to us in America is we've allowed the purveyors of division to be successful in dividing us into creating all kinds of wars. There's a war on women, race war. Anytime there's any kind of thing between two different races, the new element of the race war. Income wars, always keep it on the front burner. Age wars, and now religious wars. All of this stuff is destructive. It was Jesus himself who said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And we, the American people, have got to be smart enough to recognize that we will never succeed if all we do is fight each other and be uncivil to each other and try to destroy anybody who disagrees with you and try to destroy their business and their livelihood. I mean, when did we get like that? It's because we've been listening to the purveyors of hatred and division within our country. And we can and we must do better, because that will help us in virtually everything. And it's been a gradual thing that's happened that has gotten us to that place. You know, I remember when I was in the 5th grade, I got glasses. And wow, you mean you can actually see the board? But, you know, I had never kind of realized that everybody didn't see that way. Probably my vision had just gradually deteriorated, and I really didn't recognize that it was a problem. Well, I think that's the same thing that's been happening in our nation. This is a nation where we once had a strong conviction that there was no way we were going to leave debt to the next generation. In fact, Thomas Jefferson said it's immoral to leave debt to the next generation. And yet, what have we done? We now have an $18.4 trillion national debt. I mean, think about that. $18 trillion, we can say it, but do we have any idea what it means? If you tried to pay that back at $10 million a day, 365 days a week, it would take you more than 5,000 years. And that's what we're putting on the backs of the next generation. And a lot of people don't, it's no problem. And our representatives declare victory when the deficit doesn't go up as much this quarter as it did the last quarter. They have no concept of what victory is and what they are doing to this nation. But that's the good news, because it's actually much worse than that. It's the fiscal gap. That's where the real problem is. The amount of money that our government owes in terms of unfunded liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the departmental programs, all the cabinet programs, versus what they expect to come in from tax revenues and other sources. And those two numbers should be almost identical. That's the way your house is run, unless you're in bankruptcy. And but when that's not the case, there's a gap that's forming there. Bring that forward into today's dollars. That gap right now sits at about $211 trillion. No politicians talk about this because they want to be reelected. But since I'm not a politician, I can talk about it. And I talked about it when I made my announcement in Detroit. And the next day, a bunch of the liberal media came out and said, see, we told you Carson doesn't know anything about economics. He's crazy. He's just trying to scare people. On and on they went. And then the next day, Forbes came out with an article that said 17 Nobel laureates in economics and 1,200 economics professors agree with Carson. Well, of course, that kind of dampened their criticism a little bit. But, you know, this is a real issue. And the only reason that we can sustain that level of debt is because we can print money. We are the reserve currency of the world, and we can print money, albeit irresponsibly. You know, it's not connected to anything. We decoupled it from the gold standard in 1971. It's based on our good name, our faith, and credit, which isn't that good and could get a whole lot worse in a hurry. Now, you know, the position of reserve currency traditionally goes with the number one economy in the world, which we have been since the 1870s until last year when China became the number one economy. Would they like to be the reserve currency? Would they like to be able to print money and have things based on their currency? Of course they would. But their banking system, as you probably know, is in shambles, which is fortunate for us. What if it weren't? And there is no guarantee that this situation will last forever. They're working on it right now. The Asian International Investment Bank, they infused $100 billion into it 2 weeks ago. And several of our allies have gotten involved. They are in the process of stabilizing. What is going to happen if we do not have the wisdom and the courage to do what is needed to rectify the situation? You know, you see these things in magazines and on television, people telling you about this incredible, horrendous thing that's going to happen to us financially, so therefore buy gold or whatever. You know, I'm not asking you to buy gold, but I am asking you to wake up, because there is some truth to what is being said. You cannot go on like this and expect there not to be any consequences. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get our economy moving again. You know, from 1850 to 2000, our economy grew at an average rate of 3.3%. From 2001 to 2014, it grew at an average rate of 1.8%. That's a big difference, 1.8 to 3.3. If you project out 20 years at 1.8, you're going to have a $26 trillion economy, project out at 3.3, a $35 trillion economy. That's a big difference when you're talking about unfunded liabilities. It's the difference between collapse and not collapsing. Recently, we're not growing at all. So, this is extraordinarily problematic. But the good news, and there is some good news, we do have the most powerful economic engine the world has ever known. We just have to release it. Now, there are those who would have you believe that we are just humming, that we are doing so great. 6 or 7 years ago, the unemployment rate was 10 point something percent, and now it's down to 5.3. It just goes to show how wonderful our economic progress is and how our policies are working. The only problem with that is that it only works for people who don't know anything about economics, because you can make that number anything you want it to be based on what you include and what you exclude. The number you cannot manipulate is the labor force participation rate, and that is at its lowest ebb in 37 years. That's why people are so frustrated. They hear all this good news, but they can't go out and find a good job. They can find a chicken job. What do I mean by that? That's the 30 or 29-hour-a-week job with very little in the way of benefits. One of the problems in our society now is that in more than 30 states, you can actually collect more in terms of government benefits by sitting at home than you can from working a minimum wage job. And, in a way, I don't blame the people who say, well, shoot, I'm not going to go out and work if I can collect this. But there is a problem with that mentality, and it's something that we're going to have to fight. First of all, there's not an endless source of money, number one. And number two, and I think many people in this room would probably realize that given that choice, you might take that minimum wage job because you're learning skills, you're meeting people, you're developing relationships, you're going to climb the economic ladder, and you're going to be in much better shape a year or two later. That's a piece of information that has been lost, as many people have been trying to convince people that they are victims. These are all the kinds of things that are going to have to be fought. And also, if we really want to stimulate our economy, we got to be smart enough to recognize that having the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world is not helping us. It's driving things away from us rather than bringing things back to us. And what I would propose is that we give a tax holiday to repatriate that over $2 trillion sitting overseas. 10% of it has to be used for job creation for unemployed people. Think about that kind of stimulus, which costs the taxpayer not one penny. And revise the tax code for everybody to make it very simple, very fair. I like the biblical principle of proportionality. You make $10 billion, you pay $1 billion. You make $10, you pay $1. And you get the same rights and privileges. What could be more simple and fair than that? You have to eliminate all the loopholes and all the deductions, but that works extremely well. Now, some people say, yeah, but the guy who paid $1 billion, he's still got $9 billion left. We need to take more of his money. You know what that's called? Socialism. And it really doesn't work, because you take more of his money, next year, he has less than $1 billion to put in. Plus, he's looking for a place to hide his money. That doesn't work. What we need to be concentrating on instead is he put in $1 billion. How can we make the environment better so that next year he makes $20 billion? He can put $2 billion in. And that's what really grows the thing and creates the opportunities. On the other end of the spectrum, they say, this guy can't afford to pay $1 because, he only has 9 left. Look, I grew up very poor. I can tell you a secret if you don't know this. A lot of poor people have pride too. They don't want you to pat them on the head and say, there, you poor little thing, you can't do anything. What they would much prefer is you fix the economy and create the ladder which allows them to climb the success ladder of America and become part of the fabric of America. And when we begin to concentrate on things like that, that's when we stop fighting each other and we start working together. And I think it will make all the difference in the world. But we're going to have to be bold in the process of doing this. And some of the things aren't all that dramatic. If you freeze federal spending where it is right now for 3 years, guess what happens? You balance the budget. Boom, just like that. And I would do more than that. I would freeze federal hiring. You know, if thousands of federal workers retire each year, don't replace them. You can shift people around. And there are a number of other things in terms of Lean Six Sigma type programs that we could apply to the federal government could really reduce things in a big way. But in order to do these things, you have to be bold. And as a physician, as I close, let me just say, you know, I've been with people during the happiest times of their lives and in the worst times of their lives. I've laughed with them. I've cried with them. But the one thing that I've seen across the whole spectrum of America, every socioeconomic class, every race, is that there's so many people who are decent people who have good character. They're good people. And they deserve better than we are giving them. And we can give it to them if we work together, if we use our collective intellect, our collective talent, so that we are truly one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
Today, we are enjoying a forum featuring Dr. Benjamin Carson, candidate for the Republican nomination for president. We encourage you to organize your questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and preferably questions. If you're joining us via our webcast and would like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club. We'll try to work it in. Be sure to tune in to our Friday forums via our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Our radio, television, and web partnership with Idea Stream is made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us on Friday, July 24th, as we welcome Catherine Spiller, Executive Director of the Feminist Majority Foundation, for a conversation on how female police officers can be an asset in the reduction of police violence. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Our sponsor for today's forum is the Northeast Ohio Media Group. They're our sponsor for all City Club politics and policy programming. We thank them very much for their support. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, the City Club Youth Forum Council, Friends of Kathleen Satula, and Friends of Homer Taft. We thank you all for your support. Now, it's time to return to Dr. Carson for our traditional City Club Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding our microphones today are our content associate, Teddy Eisenberg, and City Club member, Elizabeth Falco. Do we have our first question, please?
Morning, Good afternoon, Dr. Carson. You highlight a lot of the domestic issues, but however, there's a growing concern in the United States about homegrown terrorism as it relates to foreign policy. What is your position on that? Secondly, what is your position on immigration? For us, there's a hot button issue has been immigration reform, and a lot of the border states are encountering a lot of problems with immigration, illegal immigration.
Okay, thank you. Is this working anymore?
Yes, it is.
It is working? Oh, now it is, okay. First of all, as far as our foreign policy is concerned, right now it seems that we've adopted a policy of react to what other people do. And that's not a very good policy. We need to be very proactive in the terms of what we do. So, for instance, you look at somebody like Vladimir Putin, who's very aggressive, adventurous, but fortunately right now is kind of handcuffed by his economy. He's a one-pony show, energy. Who has a lot of energy? We do. Enormous amounts of energy, but we have these archaic energy exportation rules. We need to get rid of them. They were established in the 70s when we had an energy crisis. We have the ability to liquefy natural gas now, which means it can be exported. And we should be using our Environmental Protection Agency to work with business, industry, academia to find the most environmentally friendly ways to develop our enormous energy resources, and then using them to make Europe and other parts of the world dependent on us for energy, which will greatly limit the effect of Putin. Those are the kinds of foreign policies that keep us from having to use weapons. We also need to, adhere to our commitments. Ukraine was a nuclear state. They gave up their nuclear weapons with the understanding that if they were attacked, we would help them. We won't even give them offensive weapons. The rest of the world is looking at that. When we turn our backs on our friends like Israel, the rest of the world is looking at that. So we have to keep our commitments. We have to be proactive. And as far as ISIS and the radical Islamic jihadists are concerned, we need to understand that today's situation is very different from 2003. You could argue that 2003, there was no vital U.S. interest in us invading Iraq. But right now, the jihadists want to destroy us and our way of life. There is a vital interest, and we have to stop being chicken livers, and we have to destroy them before they destroy us. I think that is absolutely essential. Now, as far as immigration is concerned, we do have an illegal immigration problem, which can be solved. We just need to secure all the borders, not just the southern borders, and it's not just involving fences and walls. We have electronic surveillance equipment, we have drones, we have a number of sophisticated technological techniques, and the fact of the matter is we're not just worried about people coming from Honduras and Mexico. We're worried about jihadists who want to come in here and destroy us. And we can't just sit around and let that happen when we have the ability to stop it. That's number one. Number two, we have to turn off the spigot that dispenses the goodies. If there's no goodies, people won't feel that they need to come here. I mean, that's common sense. That's ridiculous. But, of course, that leaves the 11.5+ million who are already here, some of whom don't know any other place. They've never seen any other place. What are we going to do with them? Some people say, round them all up and then send them back. That's impractical. That's just stupid. But what, in fact, you could do is allow them to become guest workers. They have to get registered, have to pay back taxes, they have to pay taxes going forward, but they come out of the shadows. And we also don't collapse several different kinds of industries in our country. I was talking to a farmer in Iowa a few weeks ago, has an 8,000-acre farm. He says he was trying to find any American who would work the farm for $11 an hour. He couldn't find one. So we don't want to collapse that industry. Believe me, it'll be a disaster. But it doesn't, being a guest worker does not allow you to vote, does not make you a citizen. You want to become a citizen, you get in the back of the line, you go through the same process as everybody else, but we have to pay homage to the people who've done it the right way. We can't just slap them in the face. Also, recognize that we are compassionate and innovative people. In Cameroon right now, American companies are over there developing the millions of acres of incredibly fertile land, getting enormous yields, and making good profits. And at the same time developing the infrastructure of Cameroon, providing lots of jobs, and teaching them the ag techniques which will allow them to continue to take advantage of that. It's a win-win situation which is not costing our government one penny. And those are the kinds of things that we have to start thinking about. Instead of giving away billions of dollars of foreign aid, which we do not have, by the way, every time we give away billions of dollars, we're driving that gap even further open and jeopardizing our future. But by being intelligent and doing the same kind of thing we're doing in Cameroon and Central America and South America, you create friends there and you help to build up their situation so that they don't feel the necessity to come here.
Dr. Carson, thank you for being you.
Thank you.
And on my tie, I have honeybees, because much of what you say will bring honey to the lips. The Jewish people thanks you for being a supporter,
Thank you.
also of our wonderful country, the
Thank
United
you.
States of America. I hope more of my Jewish co-religionists will be listening to you in the months ahead and take your views seriously. How is this going in the black community? Failures and successes, please.
Okay. Well, if you listen to MSNBC, they will tell you that all black people hate Ben Carson, you know, and they'll write all these articles about how he was a great person, but now he's a pariah and all black people hate him. And then I'll go to the airport and there'll be like 5 black skycaps. Dr. Carson, so good to see you. We're voting for you. You know, I mean, it's what they wish would be the case. But what they don't recognize is that a lot of black people are smarter than they think they are. And they recognize that the stuff that I'm talking about is stuff that will elevate people. I'm talking about education and empowering people. I'm talking about how people take money in their own community, turn the dollar over a few times to create wealth, and then to reach back and bring others along with them. I'm talking about the deleterious effects of out-of-wedlock birth and how that truncates the education of that woman and sends her child into poverty, where they're going to probably end up in the penal system or the welfare system. But I also talk about, you know, some of the great contributions that have been made by the black community to America that people frequently don't hear about. You know, you think about somebody like Elijah McCoy, who invented the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. In fact, he had so many inventions, when something would come out, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? Most people don't know about that. Like, you know, by the time you get through with all those things, you know, you've got people who are thinking in a different way. And that's what we're going to be working on over the course of time. And I've told the Republican Party that they really need to go out there and start talking about how do you empower people, not how do you keep people dependent like the other party.
Dr. Carson, thanks for coming. Your solution, I had 2 questions. Your solution to the health care financing issue dealt with the health savings plan. How would that help the 35 million people who at the minimum wage and really couldn't participate, couldn't really develop a health care plan? And second, if you're willing to privatize health care, what about Social Security?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me address the people who are at the minimum wage level. Many of those people are already hooked in. They're amongst those 80 million people that I just mentioned who are already getting health aid through Medicaid. They would not be affected. And the other thing you have to keep in mind, because this is all one big conglomeration here, as we fix the economy, and this is essential. I mean, it goes into a whole lot of stuff, the military, a whole lot of things. We create an atmosphere where people can move up the ladder. Right now, it's very, very stagnant. And those opportunities are not nearly as prevalent as they should be. I don't want to have 80 million people who need to depend on Medicaid. I only want the people who are truly unable to function to be there. And I think we can get to that spot, but we have to really make it a priority and concentrate on it. And what was the other issue? Social Security, which is basically a Ponzi scheme right now. It doesn't work. When it was put in place, the average age of death was 63. Now we're looking at 80, and we have not made the appropriate adjustments. What I would suggest is that we offer people the opportunity to opt out of receiving Social Security payments in lieu of tax credits. There are about 20% of Americans who could take advantage of that. And immediately, that knocks 20% off of the top of what we have to pay out. That extends the life of Social Security quite significantly. And then the other thing we have to do for people who are under 55 is very gradually start raising the age. We also really need to start educating people again about what the purpose of Social Security is. It's not there to take care of your every need once you retire. It was supposed to be supplemental. And there was a time in the past when Joe the Butcher on Friday afternoon would go to the bank and 5% of his savings would go into his savings account. And he saw that grow over decades. And it was very encouraging. 4, 5, 6%, it was growing. It was great. That doesn't happen anymore. It's been more than a decade that we've had artificially suppressed interest rates. People are not encouraged to save anymore. And it's very, very detrimental. And, poor people and middle-class people, where are they going to get growth from anymore? Where? The only place you're going to get it is in the stock market, but you have to have a risk tolerance to do that. And the only people with that kind of risk tolerance are people of upper income. So what are you seeing happen? The income gap just growing and growing. There are other factors that cause the income gap to grow, like regulations. Every time we put a regulation on, it costs money, but it disproportionately hits poor people in our country.
Carson, thank you very much for being here and for a great talk. My question, sir, is this. What is your stand on the Iranian nuclear negotiation that Mr. Kerry brought back? And if you became President, Commander-in-Chief, how would you renegotiate it? Or what would you do if we find the Iranians violating that treaty?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think when you're negotiating, with, and particularly an enemy, you have to observe certain principles, like verification, accountability, and enforcement. If you look at the agreement that we just made, those three critical things simply are not there. That's not a good negotiation. You got to know how to negotiate. So I think it was a horrible, horrible deal. I wouldn't have even started such a negotiation without getting our hostages back, for one thing. I mean, that's just ridiculous to leave them squirming over there. When I just beyond belief. But then step number one would have been, we have to be able to have our inspectors, our chosen inspectors, anywhere in the country and be able to inspect any place they want instantly. Anything less than that is a non-starter. And there aren't only two choices, as the president outlined. He said either we do this deal or we go to war with them. Those aren't the only two choices. Another choice, which I think was working great, was sanctions, and intensify those sanctions enormously. I think that would work very effectively. But you do what's necessary, because you have to recognize that a nuclear-armed Iran changes the face of the globe. And that's going to cause a nuclear race in that area, and that's going to facilitate the acquisition of nuclear arms by the jihadists. And when they get them, they will use them. And it's going to change the world forever. We have to understand that, and we have to be mature. And, in a Carson administration, we would not recognize that deal, and we would reapply the most heavy sanctions available. We would work with our friends, and we would reestablish friendship, by the way, because nobody's our friend anymore, because nobody can trust us anymore. But having that friendship and having real allies to work with you can be an extremely effective tool.
Dr. Carson, thank you for coming back to Cleveland. I invited my son, who's a sophomore in college, to see you today because I wanted him to see what a real American hero looked like.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
If you were elected president and you nibbled around the edge of this, what methods would you use to communicate to all Americans that they're not victims, that they live in the greatest country in the world so they could be accomplishers like you are, and knowing that the liberal media is going to fight you every bit of the way on that, what would you actually do?
Okay. Well, one of the things I would hope to do is help the liberal media recognize that if the country goes off the cliff, they're going off with it. They don't seem to think that far ahead. But one of the things that I have observed as I've traveled around the country, spoken to lots of different groups, is that there are some community groups that are incredibly effective in lifting people out of the gutters and helping them to become part of the fabric. There's one organization that I spoke for. It was a church-related organization. They would go out on the streets of the city and find people who were completely down and out and brought them into a program that they sponsored. It would be free of charge, cleaned them up, gave them new clothes, 13-week program to teach them how to hold a job, what the essential elements were of doing that, how to be responsible. Help them find a job, talk to their employers. In a year's time, 70% of those people were off the dole and on their own. One young lady that I talked to, when they found her, she was homeless and a drug addict. And when I talked to her, she was 3 months away from getting her PhD. You think about some of the potential that exists out there. Another program in Denver, Save Our Youth, where people like people in this room would become attached to students who were on the wrong track and bring them into their world and mentor them and show them a different way. Made an enormous difference. And I see that all over the country with these programs. And what we have to do, and I think what the Bully Pulpit can do very effectively, is help to coordinate some of these efforts. Business, industry, academia, Wall Street, churches, community groups, those are the ones that are effective in bringing people out of these dismal states because it's a relationship that is developed, and it is the relationship that works, not just throwing government money at things. If that were the work, we would be we'd be golden now, because since the 60s and the Great Society programs and the war on poverty, we spent $19 trillion to eradicate poverty. Where has it gotten us? 10 times more people on food stamps, more poverty, incarceration, crime, broken families. Everything that it was supposed to make better is not only worse, it's much worse. And that's because it is not the government's responsibility to fix these social problems. It is our responsibility as citizens of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time. Today we have been enjoying a City Club of Cleveland Forum featuring Dr. Ben Carson, Republican candidate for president. Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is now adjourned.